Hello and welcome to our first online class. I hope you all are enjoying your time in Austin for those of you who are at TASA, and for those of you who have other commitments, I hope that those commitments go well tonight, whatever they are. So I'm going to run through these slides, which I have adapted for the purpose of the video, and I believe this is going to be broken down into two videos. So that I can keep each video under 15 minutes. The overview of the class, we're going to talk about ontology versus epistemology, where you will then talk about those research paradigms that you also read about. We will go over the research examples that we were going to use in class tonight, and then we'll go over a preview for next week. We'll start with this, though, because this is funny, and memes about research are always funny, as they tend to be in general. That's actually not true. I take that back. They're almost always funny about research, though. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. And of course, if you look at that picture, you see that they are diverging opinions, and it depends on which side of those rods you're looking at, whether you see 4 rods or 3 rods. And of course, that capitalizes on this notion when we talk about epistemology and ontology of what is the truth? Is there a truth? And how can we know it? So let's start by talking about ontology. These seem like big fancy words that maybe aren't relevant to you, and I hope that after we talk about these in the context of research, the kinds of research that you all might undertake, that they'll seem more relevant and less abstract, although they are abstract. Ontology, we will start there, is the study of what there is, or what we can know about the world. I have a more formal definition: the study of claims and assumptions that are made about the nature of social reality, claims about what exists, what it looks like, and what units make it up, and how these units interact with each other. And of course, the underlying point of ontology is sort of, is there a truth? Is there one reality? Is there something that is constant? So general examples, questions such as, is there a God? Are there universal truths? In social science, we might ask questions that are more like, is there a single true experience or interpretation of a social phenomenon? Different paradigms, you will, as you've already seen and we'll continue to talk about, have very different positions on those questions. Epistemology, this is sort of the flip side of the same coin. If we've already asked what is real, or what is knowledge, what is the truth, here in epistemology, we ask the question of how do we come to know that? So what is real, and how do we know? So this is the study of how we come to know the world, how knowledge is created. Epistemology answers such questions as, what are the necessary and sufficient conditions of knowledge? What are the sources of knowledge? What is the structure of knowledge? And what are the limits of that structure and of that knowledge? And so there are 3 types of knowledge: knowing how to do something, knowing someone, and knowing a place. And according to a traditional perspective, which is, I would say, is either positivism or post-positivism, knowledge requires truth, knowledge requires belief, and knowledge requires justification. And what this means is that we can know something, some piece of information, if and only if that piece of information is true, and we are justified in believing that piece of information. So that is, again, this is about how we can acquire knowledge, how we can come to know something. And I understand that some of you may continue to say, well, I don't understand. I don't understand why we need to know this. Why are we doing reading that seems a little bit more philosophy than education research? And I would respond to saying that this is the foundation excuse me, of all research, whether it's hard sciences, whether it's social sciences, whether it's humanities. In research, we end up taking a particular position, whether you want to or not. And I think what you'll see is a lot of, for example, post-positive research does not make explicit its position on these questions, whereas other kinds of research does. So we take a position in terms of our ontology and our epistemology when we ask research questions and propose ways to answer those questions. And again, that's whether you think about it or not. The different positions we take can be grouped into paradigms or worldviews. Excuse me. The paradigm in which you work, it's going to help define your research. Very generally, and again, this is sort of a recap of what we read in the Guba and Lincoln article, post-positivism. And I'm going to skip over positivism because nobody really works in that tradition in social sciences, because at this point we recognize that we can never be 100% sure of what we are, of our results. There's always some measure of uncertainty. So we talk about post-positivism, and that's where this concept of critical realism comes from. There is some reality, and we can get pretty close to knowing it, but we can only ever do so imperfectly because of human error, because of measurement error. So we know that there's something out there, and we do our best to capture that truth, knowing that there's always a little bit of wiggle room on either side of what we find. In terms of epistemology, post-positivists believe that we can know reality objectively through observation. And what that means is that the observer and the observed are separate and can be separated. So there's no, when I do my research, I don't let my subjective position or opinion or biases alter or influence the way I conduct the research and the way I interpret my results. And in terms of methodology, the methodology is not specifically the way you'll collect data, but it's really the purpose. So when we say methodology, it's really what is the purpose of this research and this research design. The purpose of this kind of research is to build theory, to identify hypotheses, and then to test those hypotheses with the goal of falsification. And this is important, this idea of falsification. And what that means is I'm not conducting research to say, look, I've proven that this is true. And that comes back to that critical realism, this idea that we can't know the truth 100%, maybe 95%, maybe 99%. We can be sure that we are close to the truth, but we can never say that we have proven something. Instead, we say we have evidence for or evidence against. And we are looking to find evidence that either supports or falsifies our hypotheses, so evidence that would suggest that our hypotheses are incorrect. And contrary to what some people will tell you, this kind of research can include qualitative or quantitative methods. When I say methods here, I mean data collection methods. Our second paradigm is critical theory, and I, of course, started with the easy one, and now we move into sort of the ones that you perhaps are less familiar with. Critical theory, this really has its roots in Marxism, and so this idea of historical realism is a Marxist concept, and it's this idea that there is a reality. Marxists believe there is a reality. Critical theorists believe there is one. But it exists because of this confluence of social, political, and economic processes. And it almost always assumes that those processes are oppressive and that they marginalize certain groups to benefit other groups. So it's very, very explicit in its assumption about power. And the epistemology here is that while we can know about reality, there is no such thing as objectivity. Instead, what we can learn is very value-laden and contingent upon our relationship with what it is that we're learning about. And this is where you'll start to hear a lot more and read a lot more about this idea of my position, my positionality. And so my position, who I am, what I do, where I come from, the privileges I've had, the education I've had, the experiences I've had, all color the way that I come to know knowledge. And so that is subjective. And there is no objectivity. And critical theorists would say, if you try to claim that you are objective, you are lying to yourself. They would probably be very forthright about that as well. As a result, what we can learn is going to vary across contexts. A key component of critical theory is its methodology, and the purpose of this research is to transform and liberate through dialogue, and to uncover and put forward oppressed voices and knowledge. So it's very explicit that it is trying to use research to help people, to help the oppressed see the truth about their condition and about the social forces that put them in that condition. And our last paradigm that we're going to discuss is constructivism. This will probably sound familiar because we all learn about constructivism in terms of teaching. And constructivism in research is sort of a similar idea to teaching, and that is that knowledge is created through social interactions. So we don't learn through osmosis, but rather we learn through interacting with colleagues, with peers, and by constructing meaning ourselves in those interactions. So that ontology of that concept is necessarily relativist. And that means that those interactions could lead to multiple conclusions. So people who work in the constructivist tradition accept that there are multiple meanings and interpretations of quote unquote what is. And in fact, they go so far as to say, for a lot of things, there is no what is. There is no one truth. Because what is cast as the truth is going to vary. It's relative to who is perceiving it, who is saying it, who is experiencing it. And of course, those interpretations, those meanings, they vary across individuals. They vary across groups of individuals, context, and time. So again, reality is socially constructed, and truth is really this relative term. And most constructivists don't talk about one truth. The epistemology of constructivism, similar to critical theories, there is no, and probably even stronger than critical theory, there is no objectivity. Meaning and knowledge are created subjectively through the research process. So the research process, if we go down to the methodology, is meant to construct meaning. You interact with the people you are collaborating with, the people you are interviewing, the people you are observing. There's unlike in post-positivism, there's really not a separation between the researcher and the researched. There is, in fact, a necessary symbiosis because it's those interactions that helps the researcher distill meaning. And again, remember, the point is not to prove, the point is not to show that there's a relationship necessarily. The point is to uncover meaning. So with that, I'm going to stop this video, and the next video is going to deal with the examples of research that fall into each paradigm.